Fisherman is an experimental 1914 poem by William Butler Yeats, which invents the idea of an ideal reader as a representation of an ideal nationalist symbol. Yeats chooses the symbol of a fisherman as the perfect Irishman and the perfect man of the movement. Written at a time where Yeats had become fed up with Irish society, the fisherman is a man who is simple and wise, situated neatly into the national landscape of which he belongs. Although I can see him still, the freckled man who goes to a grey place on a hill, in grey Connemara clothes. The man he sees is freckled, a distinct feature commonly associated with Irish people, and which distinctly situates the poem in an Irish identity. Connemara in this context refers to a location in Ireland, particularly in West County Galway in the west of Ireland, famous for speaking Connacht. The region is distinctly linked to Irish culture, and the Connemara clothes he refers to is likely perhaps a shawl. The repetition of the grey in these lines makes the fisherman appear to blend into the landscape and almost to camouflage amongst the natural space. He's not only a fisherman, but an extension of Ireland itself. At dawn to cast his flies. It's long since I began to call up to the eyes this wise and simple man. Casting his flies refers to the act of fly fishing or coarse fishing in the water for predatory fish. The oxymoron of the wise yet simple man shows Yeats's ideal of the perfect Irishman being simple but educated and of good taste. His idea consists of a humble man of good nature who has an appreciation for the simplicities but also eccentricities of life, which is characterized by his decision to choose a fisherman over other occupation. As opposed to perhaps someone like a baker or a farmer, a fisherman braves the water and is self-sufficient. All day I looked in the face what I had hoped it would be, to write for my own race and the reality. Yeats's own race, as stressed by the spondee employed in the paragraph, is contrasted to the tasteless and unsatisfactory Dublin audience, who are the living men that he hates. He sees the fisherman as the ideal for the race of Irishmen, as compared to the rowdy and rude Irish that he pictured. His own race is the ideal idea of the new Irish revival and of the new Irish identity which he believed could be influenced by such high-class poetry of good taste. The living men that I hate, the dead man that I loved, the craven man in a seat, the insolent unreproved, and no knave brought to book, whose one drunken cheer, the woody man in his joke, aimed at the commonest ear. This section satirizes the Irish crowd, who Yeats sees as unintellectual and bullish, filled with craven, cowardly men, as well as men seeking short-term moronic pleasure with foppish jokes aimed at the commonest ear, or essentially the telling of uninspired weak humour meant to satisfy the lowest denominator. The unoriginality and uninspired nature of the drunken caricatures Yeats creates almost dominates the poem, and creates a noise that drowns out this idea of the pastoral man, showing their annoyance to Yeats. The passage is iambic and aggressive, far more dissonant than the passage with the fisherman and the use of slant rhyme as compared to the previously even ABAB rhyme. It throws the reader off balance, almost as if they walk from this rural, natural landscape into a rowdy and disorienting Irish pub. The clever man who cries, the catch cries of the clown, the beating down of the wise, and great art beaten down. Yeats suggests that this drunken deluge is not only harmful to the people themselves, but beats down art itself. The repetition of the beaten down link, the beating of the wise, people like the fisherman is the antithesis of art itself. The repeated use of consonants also adds a cacophonic element to the poem. Maybe a 12 months since, suddenly I began, in scorn of this audience, imagining a man. The audience is the Dubliners, and he escapes this image and retreats into the Irish wilderness through this image of this fisherman that becomes this ephemeral dream and idea that he latches onto. And his sun-freckled face and grey Connemara cloth climb up to a place where stone is dark with froth. The framing device here, which repeats the starting lines, centers the poem back onto the ephemeral, illusory image of the fisherman, who is now sun-freckled. Freckling from the sun is juxtaposed to the stony climes, which is dark with froth, perhaps suggesting a supersession or a moving on. And the downturn of his wrist, when the fly just drop in the stream, a man who does not exist, a man who is but a dream. The moment of physical simplicity with the focus of the flick of the wrist and the subsequent dropping of the fly in the water emphasize the simplicity of the man, and in a haiku-like moment captures a fleeting moment of beauty. The anaphora of the "a man" highlights how the sun-freckled fisherman is not only an unrepresentative shadow cast by Yeats's mind, but that Yeats also struggles to acknowledge this fact, that he needs to do a double-take and tell himself that he's gone. This use of the indefinite article for the old fisherman is also juxtaposed to the previous use of the definite article for the different types of the men in Irish society, who are established, albeit tasteful, archetypes. And cried, "Before I am old, I shall have written him one. Paul may be as cold and passionate as the dawn." Here is another oxymoronic statement by Yeats. The contrast of cold and passionate to describe the dawn highlights a corpse-like beauty. The dawn, which marks the period between twilight and sunrise, mirrors his imagining of the Irish revival, that like the cold, wistful Irish morning, and perhaps the embers of the movement that are still cold, that like passionate sunrise will rise eventually and bring light to the freckles of this dreaming, wise fisherman.